over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Lots of great stuff over there right now that you definitely want to look to take advantage of. We've got updated NFL power ratings from Danny Vorgs. Very, very good there. Also, Fabian Sommer, who you know better on Twitter as Suma, S-U-U-M-A, writing up a preview for us on the Patriots versus Chiefs game for the AFC Championship. So that should be an outstanding piece there. Then, of course, we've got daily NBA and college basketball picks, college basketball daily article from Kyle Hunter, NHL daily picks from Parker Michaels. I wrote up a couple of previews for the conference championship games. We'll have best bets, prop bets, all kinds of stuff for the NFL weekend. Very busy time over at BangTheBook.com. Want to make sure you check out everything that we have to offer. Also, go to YouTube.com, search Bang the Book. Check out the videos that we're doing over there. We'll have another one on Friday from Kyle Hunter. I'm doing daily videos Monday through Friday. And I'll do a Sunday morning video here this weekend as well. So lots and lots of stuff going on for us at BangTheBook.com. Please support what we're doing because I think everyone's doing a fantastic job with their own little niches over there, and then me just kind of covering all of it for the most part here. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB200 is your promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook, 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino. Both of those up to $500 at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. Recorded this show on Thursday afternoon. 3 guests, once again, Kyle Hunter, Christian Pina, and Brent from DSI Sportsbook. College basketball, UFC, odds report for the conference championship games in the NFL. So jam-packed show here, to say the least. So let's go ahead and get this thing started with our first segment featuring Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com for our Handicapping the Hardwood segment. All right, I'm joined now by Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at HunterSportsPicks.com, also now a regular contributor to BangTheBook.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
Doing fine, man. How are you doing today?
Doing very well. Appreciate your time as always. And, that daily article you're doing for us over at Bang the Book, still going pretty well.
Yeah, it is going along pretty well. I have to be honest, I kind of worry about how high expectations are here from the beginning. But it's one of those things where you'd much rather have the record start what it is now than to flip it around. So let's see how we can keep doing. And I like playing these first half plays in the article because it's something that I can't do as far as, on the websites that I'm on, as far as premium selections. And as I've tracked these in the past, I've done pretty well on them. So people can expect to see quite a few of those first half plays going forward.
Well, and not too much hateful feedback as of yet because you're running pretty well with it so far. But something that's very important to bring up, and I do want to mention this here on this segment, and it's something I could mention on damn near every show if I wanted to. There's going to be variance. And you've mentioned this already that, the clip that you're on with that article is not going to continue. And some people may jump on the picks, maybe starting Sunday, and maybe all of a sudden you go 3-10 or something like that. But these are tried and true long-term systems. And, the evaluation, the study that you've been doing, you believe in what you're doing. It's been successful long-term. So I fully expect this article to be successful long-term, even if people may catch on to it at the wrong time here at some point.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that I've had a lot of success on in the past, and I'm confident that these are things that will win in the long term. Now, as I've said before, in a month or two, a shorter period of time, I certainly can't guarantee it. I don't want to be that guy that says, hey, jump on board with these free picks at BangTheBook.com, and it's, I guarantee you're going to build up your bankroll. That's not how you've done this show, and I appreciate that. And it's not how I work either. What I'm going to say is I'm going to put a lot of time into it. Every day when I handicap these college basketball games, I'm spending a lot of time going through all these games. The Thursday cards, the Saturday cards, very extensive, very long time. It's one of those things where I love college basketball, but at the end of the college basketball season, I'm definitely ready for a break, just because it's a really a daily grind. And I think you probably feel the same way about baseball.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where, you have to learn how to manage your time and, of course, learn how to manage, your emotions to get through the season, because it is a big time drain and, can be something that's very, very hard mentally, to say the least. So, as a professional handicapper, you have to know all the teams. You have to be able to find value and extract it everywhere. For our listeners out there, we talk about conference specialization a lot because you're a full-time handicapper. I'm full-time studying this business as well. A lot of people can't do that. So conference specialization, very important. And I'm trying to go through here on the show, break down these conference by conference and go a little bit more in-depth. So I figured for our first time doing that with you here this season, why not do the Sun Belt since we keep talking about it anyway?
Oh, yeah, we love the Sun Belt. When you said we were going to do the Sun Belt, I thought, that's really fitting. I mean, we talk about the Sun Belt quite a bit, and, it's a conference where you can find some under-the-radar value. Some of the other conferences, if we were breaking them down, I'd like to say, let's see how the public's done when they bet this. Look, it doesn't matter in the Sun Belt because the public's not betting the Sun Belt, hardly ever. So, looking at the public betting percentages, to me, doesn't mean very much because there just aren't very many bets in the Sun Belt to start with. So I think it's a very interesting under-the-radar conference.
It really is. And let's go ahead and talk about some angles and some trends and some statistics and things of that sort from the Sun Belt here, beginning with the fact that this is a conference where the dogs do like to bark.
Yeah, the dogs have been pretty good here, 729, 685. Certainly not a really strong angle. I mean, it's 51.5% ATS, but it's something to keep in mind that, pretty consistently underdogs have done well in the Sun Belt. I actually looked up, home and road splits here, almost exactly 50-50. It's just a couple games off 50-50. So no big home court advantages that, would show up in the conference or no big, overvaluing of home court advantage. But underdogs have done pretty well here. It's one where, underdogs, you want to look to have more reasons to take the underdog than the favorite, but it's certainly not something you just want to blindly bet.
Now, what do you think is the reason for that? I mean, is it because the talent gaps between these teams are, as a general rule, pretty small?
Yeah, I think that, Georgia State's the best team in this conference, but you look down through the rest of the conference, when I was looking at, ranking the teams in the conference, there's quite a bit of, similarity. You could say, Team X could be fifth best, Team X could be seventh or eighth best, and different people could disagree, and I wouldn't say either person was wrong necessarily. So I think that has a lot to do with it. I think there's also quite a bit of inconsistent play in the Sun Belt. You have teams that can play really well for one game, but they turn it over too much, don't play good enough defense to where they're not going to consistently be a really good team. So I think that inconsistency and teams just not having that much difference between the two of them.
Well, and of course, I mean, people remember Georgia State for Ron Hunter falling off of his stool and, everything that happened with them in the NCAA tournament. But, you also have a conference here where, there was one year where Little Rock was really, really good. And then Chris Beard moves on to Texas Tech. UT Arlington's a team that has been pretty good, not so much to the same degree in this conference, but in their previous conference, they were very good. Coastal Carolina, when they were in the Big South, they were a team that was usually in that championship game. So you have some teams that have some pedigree from lesser conferences, but then you also have some teams here in the Sun Belt that, they'll step up every now and then, like a Louisiana Lafayette or like a Texas State, something like that. They'll have a really good 1 or 2 years, and then all of a sudden they fall back to the pack again. And I think it's tough for the odds makers and perception to really stay on top when you've got a conference that's not really bet a whole lot like this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you have a team like Georgia State that you just expect to be at the top or near the top, and then you have a lot of teams that, like you said, are kind of rotate through there. You got the Raging Cajuns of Louisiana, a team that's going to be pretty good every year, but not the top of the conference. Arlington has been a pretty good team. They've dropped back some now, have a whole new team. State's always pretty good because they play better defense than everybody else or almost everybody else in this conference. But, you have a lot of teams there in the middle of the pack in the Sun Belt where there's just not much of a difference. And it wouldn't be shocking if one team pulled a, outright upset when they were a 7-point underdog. I don't have the trends in front of me right here, but to be honest with you, I would think this being an underdog conference, I would think that playing money line underdogs in this conference would have probably done pretty well in the long term.
Now, one thing you did look up and one thing that you did send over in the notes here, and this is something that works pretty well in the country overall, but it actually works even better in the Sun Belt Conference.
Yeah, you look at teams who haven't covered very well for the year so far, playing against teams who have covered at a high rate. This has been really good in college basketball in general, to be honest, but it's even better in the Sun Belt. You take a team that's covering less than 52% of the time against a team that's covering 52% or more. You've got 387 and 293 ATS. That's 56.9%. Look, I mean, 56.9%, that's nothing to sneeze at. You know, anybody would take 56.9%. As much as you might hear a handicapper tell you, I'm going to hit 65% or I'm going to shoot for 68%, it's just not going to happen. You know, 56.9% is a tremendous angle, and that dates back quite a while, and it's a pretty big sample size. So I think that proves kind of proves the first point we were talking about, I think. I mean, this is a conference where inconsistency and not much of a difference between teams, and that would lend itself to this angle making a lot of sense.
Well, of course, too, keep in mind here, this is a league that can have some big strength of schedule discrepancies as well, based
Definitely.
on how these teams schedule up in the non-conference. And you notice a team like UT Arlington, for example, that doesn't have a Division I FBS team. I think they're the only team now in this conference that doesn't have one, with Coastal making that transition. I guess Little Rock as well. So UT Arlington and Little Rock, the two teams that don't have a Division I FBS football team, they have to restock the coffers a little bit for the athletic department. So a team like UT Arlington will schedule up significantly, and then when they get into conference play, maybe they are a team with a bad ATS record. So, we'll see how that dynamic plays out a little bit here over the course of the season. But one of the things that we talked about earlier in the week, I believe I talked about it with Rolf Michaels, I think, or maybe I talked about it with you. You've got a situation here where you've got a smaller conference and they group road games in a really interesting way.
Yeah, they group road games all the time in this conference. You got Texas State, for example, and UT Arlington. Very often you'll have teams do that trip to where it's, App State goes to Texas State on a Thursday night, and then they go to UT Arlington on a Saturday. There's two things that are interesting about that. First of all, it's a pretty long trip for some of these teams to go to Texas. You think about Coastal Carolina, App State, teams like that. That's a pretty long trip. Second is it's always a quick turnaround. They almost always play Thursday night and Saturday afternoon. One of the shortest turnarounds you'll see in the regular season in college basketball. So the back end of a game like that, certainly not one that I would want to back the team that is coming from a long ways away. And I think it also depends on how they played in that first game. Some people have asked me before, what's the ideal situation? I think it certainly depends on the team, but if you get a really bad team that somehow pulls a stunning upset at Texas State, and then they play UT Arlington the next game, and then the odds makers are, bumping up their perception of that team a little bit, I think that's a good fade. On the other hand, if you get the team in the first game just totally lays an egg, and then it's hard in the second game because you don't know if maybe they might show a little bit more effort. So it really depends on how the first game goes, but in general, I wouldn't want any part of backing a team that's a long ways away on that short turnaround.
Well, I think another one, too, that it's very good to mention, Appalachian State and Coastal Carolina, because Coastal Carolina in the Myrtle Beach area and Conway, South Carolina, Appalachian State, Boone, North Carolina, and this is something that you mentioned, I believe, in your situational article that makes Boone, North Carolina a really difficult spot to play.
Yeah, Boone's the highest elevation east of the Mississippi, so it's one that, to be totally honest with you, I kind of overlooked it a few years ago. As I started watching it, I thought, this makes a lot of sense to me. That Boone was, I've been to Boone, North Carolina. I know it's pretty high up. You think about things that, in real life should apply to handicapping. That's one of them right there. Appalachian State has a really good home field advantage of football. In basketball, it's a pretty good home court advantage as well, especially on that back end. You take a team. Really, to be totally honest with you, there's a lot of teams in this conference that are not very close to Coastal Carolina or App State. The Texas teams, even the Louisiana teams, South Alabama, not particularly close. None of them are really that close. So it's a decent trip for everybody. I would say, I guess, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, not too terribly far away. But in general, App State is not very close to any of these teams. And you get them get another team on the back end of, say they play a really hard-fought game and then a game on Thursday night, and then they play at App State on a Saturday. I think that's an ideal spot to fade that team.
Now, something about these small conferences is that, when you do get a team that can play with a certain level of consistency, there's a side on their backs. You think of Wichita State when they're playing in the Mo Valley. You think of a team like probably Stephen F. Austin in the Southland Conference. Teams that have had a lot of success in these low and mid majors. It's tough a little bit to measure up with that team, and it can have some longer term impacts.
Yeah, this is one that I was thinking about here today as I was preparing some notes for the show. I thought I would think it would make sense to go against Georgia State or go against a team that had just played Georgia State. So I ran a query on this one to see how it is done to just fade teams after playing Georgia State. Teams who just played Georgia State in the game prior, in the next game are 35-52 ATS in the last 87. So, that's just a little above 40% ATS. So definitely fading that team that just played Georgia State has done very well. I think this one makes a lot of sense. If you think about how much better Georgia State is, than a lot of the other teams. Georgia State plays some good defense every year. They always have a star player. Right now it's Simons. This is one of those spots where you really get up for a game against Georgia State. You put a lot of effort into it. That's the team you're gunning for. And then the next game you play somebody else in the league that's definitely not going to be as big a name opponent. You've already put a lot of effort into that game. I think that going against the team right after they just played Georgia State makes a lot of sense moving forward.
All right, so obviously as we kind of rank these teams a little bit and then transition to some of our other talking points here, Georgia State, the top dog or the top cat, as it were, since they're the Panthers, in this conference. What about the rest of the Sun Belt? How do you sort of stack these teams up?
Yeah, like I said, I think you could easily have disagreements here, and it wouldn't be too shocking. I put Georgia Southern second. I like the style of play that they're using now. They're playing very fast. They have a really good player in Tukey Brown. Texas State, I put third. I like their defense. They play very good defense, trapping style. They slow things down on offense. Louisiana, I put fourth. Louisiana's been well coached, and they always get on the offensive glass. They're a quality team that usually schedules up. I put Monroe fifth, LA Monroe fifth, and this is a questionable one because I think that their offense is going to come back, to the pack a little bit as far as the regression, like we talked about before. I think they are better on defense than most teams in this conference in a usual year. I put Troy right behind them, and I think that Troy and Monroe are just about tied. Troy has Jordan Barnado, very good player here for the Sun Belt, maybe the second or third best player in this conference. Coastal Carolina right behind them. Coastal Carolina catches people in bad spots quite a bit, like we were just talking about. And Coastal Carolina has underachieved a little bit so far this year. Then UT Arlington. UT Arlington, to me, a team that is undervalued at this point because of how tough their schedule's been and because they're such a young team. They're improving throughout the course of the season. So I think Arlington will be a good bet on team moving forward. Put Little Rock after that. Little Rock played some decent teams in the non-conference as well and actually held their own, not too badly. Then I put App State. App State has one really good player, Ronchad Shabazz, I think it is, something like that. A really good guard, can get into the lane, kick it out, or can score himself. I put second from the bottom, and then Arkansas State, the last team. I don't like that Arkansas State can't play much defense at all. This is a team that has been really poor on defense every single year here lately, and they really don't play much of a tough schedule at all, so I put them at the bottom.
So you got Georgia State 4-0 here in conference play so far. Texas State 3-1, Coastal Carolina 1-3, App State 0-4. Every other team in the conference 2-2 here so far. So outside of the spot plays that we talked about, are there any other betting angles that you're looking at as we go forward here over the next week or two?
Well, I think that a team like Troy is a good team to back against a team that can't rebound very well. Jordan Varnado is going to get a lot of offensive rebounds. He's also a good shot blocker, but I think that Troy is one of those teams that you look for an opponent who can't grab defensive rebounds. Troy's going to get a lot of second chances. The same thing with Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns. Always very good on the offensive glass. They're going to get plenty of second chance points. And then also another thing that I look for in this conference is those pace wars. There's several teams in this conference that really like to run. Georgia Southern, Louisiana. You got some other teams in this conference that really want to slow things down. You got Texas State always trying to slow things down a lot. App State, another team that plays really fast and doesn't play much defense. So in general, most teams in this conference want to play fast. You've got teams like Coastal Carolina usually try to slow it down a little bit too. Monroe usually tries to slow the game down some. I think there's a lot of pace wars in this conference, and I think that trying to know who you think will dictate the pace is pretty important when you're handicapping this conference.
This metaphor may be a little bit of a reach, but you mentioned teams being really good on the offensive glass. Is that, in terms of a sundae, is that the ice cream for you? Is that a topping, or is that just that little cherry on top that puts you over the top to make a play?
I'm always in favor of talking about ice cream. I would say that it's one of those things that's pretty important. I think it's more important than most people think it is. You can go through and look at, I've run queries on this through Bet Labs before. It's something where defensive rebounding is very important. Giving the other team an extra shot. If you think about it, if you're going to make, X percentage of your shots, but then you get 2 or 3 tries, there's a pretty good chance you're going to end up making one of those shots. It's part of the reason that North Carolina is always so good is they always crash the offensive glass. They're so good at getting second chance points. I think that more important to me is how a team rebounds defensively than how they rebound offensively. It's okay with me if you don't get a ton of offensive rebounds, but you got to get that defensive rebound, giving the team a second chance. Very important. So I would say it's somewhere in between, to be honest with you. It's certainly not the sole reason I'd want to make a bet, but at the same time, it is pretty important.
Is that one of the more important? Obviously you've got the efficiency metrics, and I know you're a big totals guy, so tempo's in there. If you were to put, defensive rebounding somewhere, is that kind of a top 5 consideration for you?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. I think, another one that would be in there is turnover percentage. You just can't turn the ball over constantly, and some of these teams in the Sun Belt do that quite a bit. So, that's something to keep an eye on. Is you have some teams in this conference who are turning it over at a really high rate. Take Coastal Carolina, for example, 21% of their possessions ending in a turnover. It's hard to win when you're turning it over that much. A team like Georgia State's almost always good at taking care of the ball. That difference between a team that's at 17% and 21.5% or something like that in turnovers also very important. So I would say defensive rebounds and turnovers are pretty even for me, and both of them are certainly in the top 5.
All right, so we transition into looking at some positive and negative regression candidates here, and we'll start with the team that should get a little bit better as we stay down in those low majors and talk about the Ohio Valley Conference.
Yeah, Eastern Kentucky's offense. First of all, Eastern Kentucky plays really, really fast. I believe they're second in the nation in tempo. This is a team that's hitting 30% from three-point range so far this year. They were 35% last year. They've played the 70th toughest schedule as far as defenses so far this year, according to Ken Pomeroy. Obviously, they're not going to be playing many good defenses in the OVC. Most of these defenses are, bottom 50 or 75 defenses in the country. I think Eastern Kentucky is going to score quite a few points here going forward. I think their efficiency metrics will improve as we look toward the next few weeks.
Yeah, Eastern Kentucky is a team I mentioned actually a week ago in my 3-pack video over on our YouTube page, and I liked them against Tennessee State because they were already 0-2. They'd lost to Austin Peay and Murray State. They had Belmont on deck, so I figured, okay, rallying point game for them to look a little bit better, dropping down in terms of class. And of course, they wind up losing that one 82-81. But I was a little bit gun-shy to go back on them here this Thursday, but I did like them in that spot against UT Martin. In a game that will be last night for our listeners. But I think that's definitely one that you want to look at there is, keep that in mind too, is when a team plays the top teams in its conference, in a lot of these low major leagues, there's a very clear separation.
Well, and the other thing that's important to point out about Eastern Kentucky is all their games have been on the road in the conference. They played 4 straight road games. Now they play 4 straight home games. That's a pretty strange schedule. You don't see that very often, but I think Eastern Kentucky is better than their record would indicate. They've played the 78th toughest schedule in the country so far this year. much tougher schedule than what most teams have played in the OVC.
Now, Eastern Kentucky number 2 to FIU when it comes to tempo, according to Ken Palm anyway. When you've got a high-tempo team, I mean, does that scare you away from them on the road just because you can reasonably assume they'll be less efficient?
Yeah, I don't read into that too much. I think that would be something that it depends on the team, obviously. I mean, what Eastern Kentucky's doing is they're using a full-court press and trying to get turnovers and quick points. They're 58th best in the country so far in turnover percentage. I would expect that they probably want to get a higher turnover percentage than that based on full-court pressing almost all the time. You know, if you're pressing that much, you should probably be in the top 25 in turnover percentage. To me, you know, obviously you're going to get lower efficiency rates on the road, but I think that's kind of baked into the numbers, so I wouldn't read too much into that.
All right, so let's talk about a negative regression candidate here as we transition over to one of the major conferences for a second and hit up the ACC.
I think Pitt's defense is going to regress quite a bit here. And also look at their ATS record. Pitt is 13-3-1 ATS defense, and I think this is a pretty good regression candidate. They're ranked 9th in the country in effective field goal percentage defense, 25th in defensive efficiency. They played the 344th toughest non-conference schedule. I mean, they've got a lot of really good offenses coming at them soon. This is a young team. I'd look to fade this team or play overs with them. Pitt is trying to push the tempo. Most teams in the ACC are fine with pushing pace. Pitt could certainly see a decent amount of high-scoring games. And I do think that looking to fade them would have some value going forward as well.
And I think Pitt's another one of those teams, too. You know, going with Capel as the head coach, they're getting some press now. They're getting a little bit of love. And we've talked about this already, but with a lot of public bettors creeping into the market, and even more after this NFL weekend because we won't have an NFL game for 2 weeks, teams that start to get a little bit of a buzz that are overachieving are very clear fade candidates.
Absolutely. And if you look at why they're going to be getting some buzz right now, it's largely because they just beat Florida State. But Florida State was in a terrible spot in that one. To be totally honest with you, I strongly considered taking Pitt in that game against Florida State, really kicking myself for not doing that. That was a plus 5.5 on Pitt or something like that. They win by 13. Florida State's one of those teams that's very inconsistent. You know, they can have a really good effort against a team that's very good and then drop the next game. Never been a big fan of Leonard Hamilton and his coaching, so I think that lends itself more to those inconsistent performances. But I think that Pitt is certainly overvalued at this point.
All right, so from one fade team to another, as we go back to the mid-majors here and hit up the Mo Valley Conference, who are you looking to fade right now?
Yeah, Evansville. You know, they're 11-5 ATS, fairly young team, new system. I think they're playing hard. I think this is a team that's certainly trying pretty hard. They have 7 Missouri Valley Conference road games left. The MVC is one of the conferences where home court advantage is the most important. Evansville is really inefficient on offense. And at this point in the season, they have been really, really good on defense in the Mo Valley. You know, to me, are they going to be able to keep those numbers up on defense? I think it's pretty unlikely. I mean, if you look at what they're giving up right now in the conference, they're giving up 0.861 points per possession. I mean, that's like Virginia-type numbers or Texas Tech-type numbers. I don't think they can keep that up. Opponents are shooting 19.5% from three-point range. So at some point here, I think the fact that their offense is so inefficient is going to catch up to them.
Well, we don't want to be all doom and gloom on this segment as we go back to another low major, and quite frankly, this will probably end up being one of the conferences that we talk about on Monday here, the Big Sky Conference. Who's your follow team up there in the Great Northwest?
I've always liked the Big Sky. I don't know really why I do so well in the Big Sky compared to other conferences. I assume it has something to do with this is about as far under the radar as you can get, you know, less efficiency in the market, but I've always done well on totals in the Big Sky, especially. I really think that Montana is the best team in this conference. And, you know, they've started out a little bit slow in here. They're 4-2 in the conference, had 2 straight losses. Then they go to Northern Colorado, who may be the second best team in this conference, and they went 88-64. I think that was a really telling game. Montana is the best team in this conference. They're only 6-9 ATS so far this year. have non-conference wins at home by 7 against Georgia State, and on the road a really impressive win at South Dakota State by 11 points. So to me, this is a team who best as far as talent in this conference. They're the team that got to the big dance in this conference last year. I think that there's a good chance that they'll be the team in the big dance again this year, and I think at this point they're undervalued.
Yeah, I think we will talk Big Sky on Monday, not just because it's a conference where you've had success, but also a lot of nuance to this conference. You've got a lot of really interesting situational spots and scheduling spots. You've got some pretty significant rivalry games up here too. So definitely a conference that we'll dig into a little bit more on Monday, and we'll see if we do another conference on Monday or just continue with this current format. But let's talk some games for this weekend, and that is one of the nice things we can do with this Friday segment, or with our Thursday recording going into our Friday segment. We can look at that big card for Saturday and Sunday. Let's start with the biggest game on the board. We've been giving a lot of love to small conferences here. Saturday is all about Virginia and Duke.
Yeah, you talk about big games. This would be right at the top of the list. Virginia is Virginia. They're just amazing at defense. I'll say that I tried to play a Virginia under the other day against Virginia Tech. That game, pretty crazy if you look at it. 56 possessions, just a really, really slow pace. Virginia just makes just about every single shot. So, I think they were 10 of 12 from three-point range at one point. 1.45 points per possession, about as good as you'll ever see shooting from anybody. Big statement game from Virginia in that game. I think the interesting thing here is going to be, Duke, how do they do without the Trey Jones? Trey Jones is their best defender. I honestly, I don't even think it's close. They have a good defense for the season, but now without him, how are they going to do? I assume that Duke's going to keep scoring plenty of points. They have a lot of options on offense. Zion Williamson is tremendous, and he gets all the love and all the credit from people at ESPN and the talking heads. To be totally honest with you, I don't think that he's necessarily that much better than R.J. Barrett. R.J. Barrett, a tremendous player, and then Reddish is a good player as well. Trey Jones, they're going to miss him. Duke has a lot more really good players than what people think. It's not just Zion Williamson and a bunch of guys who are decent. They have some real superstars on this team. Now, how are they going to do it against Virginia? I assume that this is going to be one of those epic pace wars because Duke does not want to get into a 55-53 game against Virginia. Where's this total going to come out? I see Ken Palm has it projected at 140. I'd be surprised if it comes out at 140. I think that's probably a little bit high. Virginia is just so consistent at having lower scoring games. I think it's hard to put a Virginia total at 140. If it is at 140, I assume it'll get that down. Last year, 65-63 game, Virginia at Duke. Duke is playing faster this year than they did last year. They're also better at defense so far this year, but I don't know if they'll continue to be better at defense without Trey Jones. I'm not sure I want to bet this game, but it's certainly one I want to watch. And I think you'll find out a lot about both of these teams here. Virginia, people still giving them a hard time based on the way they lost at the end of last year to the 16 seed. We've talked about how it might be a disadvantage to them. I think it is a disadvantage to play so few possessions that makes for closer games. But Virginia's a really good team. They've been really good for a long time. Tony Bennett's a very good coach. Obviously, Coach K is a great coach. Let's see who wins out as far as the pace war here. I think that's the most interesting thing is, let's see if Duke can force their will onto Virginia. I think it'll be pretty hard.
Well, something that I think is interesting, you look back to that neutral site game against Texas Tech on December 20th, and Texas Tech is not nearly as slow as Virginia. They're not even there really aren't any teams that are as slow as Virginia. Texas Tech, 243rd in the country in tempo, according to Bart Torvik. That was a game at 82 possessions that finished with 127 points. So Texas Tech didn't really slow the game down, but they uglied up the game enough to hang around for quite some time. Does that game have any bearing on this one? Because that's the obvious comparison that people are going to make.
Well, I think the problem with comparing that one, is it's probably not an apples-to-apples comparison. I remember I had the under in that game. I watched that entire game. That was at Madison Square Garden. So, we talked about MSG quite a few times before. There can be some really bad shooting numbers at games at MSG. I think that, Virginia is not going to let this game be played at 82 possessions like Texas Tech did. That definitely won't happen. The question is, how much better will the shooting numbers be? I think they'll be quite a bit better. To me, Duke's going to probably be favored by, 2 points, 2.5 points. It's hard to say, though. Without Trey Jones, it might be a 1 or 1.5 point spread here in favor of Duke. I think that it's hard to make Virginia a favorite at Duke. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, Duke is the odds maker's favorite to win it all. What do they think of them minus Trey Jones? I think that they might even undervalue how much he means to this team. But at the same time, do you want to go against Duke after they just lost in overtime last game? I think that's pretty hard.
All right, so the follow-up question here, with a game of this magnitude, you've got Duke on the road at Pitt on Tuesday. You've got Virginia hosting Wake Forest. They'll be laying 3 touchdowns or more in that game. Do you look to play against these two teams with a little bit of a hangover effect on Tuesday?
That's a hard question. I mean, we just talked about Pitt, and I don't really want to back Pitt, so I probably wouldn't play against Duke in that game. And then Virginia, I mean, they've been pretty immune to these spots that should be, let down spots or hangover spots in the past. So, generally I would say yes, but in this case, I don't think either of these would be ones that I'd be looking to go against.
All right, so let's go to a very, very different game here, but still an extremely interesting one. Penn and Temple. What is the reason why you put this game on the card here?
Well, first of all, I mean, this is a game where the two teams are so close in proximity that this is a rivalry game. You've got Penn and Temple. Penn really started the season out playing well. If you look at what they were doing early in the season, Penn was, beating Miami at home. They beat Villanova at home. That was a huge win for them. Then they went on the road at New Mexico. New Mexico is not that good of a team this year, but that's a really good home court advantage at New Mexico. So that was still a pretty good win. Since then, just totally fell apart. They lost at Toledo by 32 points. That one doesn't make much sense at all. And they lost at home to Monmouth in overtime, which I believe that was Monmouth's first win of the season. Then they lose 2 games in a row to Princeton to start the season off, which, I don't want to get off on a tangent or anything, but it doesn't really make any sense for the first 2 games of the Ivy League conference play to be against the same team. I don't know why you would do that. But Penn loses the first game in overtime on the road and loses by 9 at home because they couldn't throw a rock in the ocean. I think this is a good spot to back Penn here. I think the Temple comes into this one riding pretty high. They've won 7 of their last 8 games. I mean, in general, they're 14-3 straight up. So this is a Temple team that's had a lot more success than most people thought they would have. They're going to be laying 9, 9.5, 10 points, something like that here. I take the points here with Penn. I think that Penn is going to keep this game closer than what most people would think. Penn has a pretty good defense. They have not shot well at all of late. I assume their shooting numbers will get better, and I think that if you look at Temple, Temple's a quality team. I'm not saying they're a bad team at all, but I think that Temple at this point could be overvalued a little bit as well.
Couple of recent overtime games for Temple as well, and that 4-point win over Houston. So they've played some high octane, got to play till the final horn types of games here lately. Whereas for Penn, these Ivy League teams, they basically have the entire week off. I mean, they're coming last Saturday, so nice long layoff for them to practice, worry about school, and obviously it makes sense with this being an Ivy. But also, while this is a rivalry game, while it is close in proximity, for Temple here, I mean, leaving AAC play is a little bit strange for this one-off game.
It is, and look at who they play after this. They play Memphis, Cincinnati, and Houston, 3 quality teams. If anybody was going to overlook this game, it would be Temple, not Penn. Penn should be up for this game. Penn's not as good as Temple, but I'm not sure that there's as big of a difference as what the point spread will indicate.
All right, so one that I pointed out to you here that we threw on the card, and I wanted to talk about this one because, as I've mentioned here throughout the week on the show, we've got conferences lined this year that traditionally aren't lined until the conference tournaments. The WAC, the Big South, the MEAC, the SWAC, Southland, so on and so forth. There's a really intriguing spot here on Saturday night in the Western Athletic Conference.
Yeah, this is a very good spot. I was glad you brought it up. New Mexico State and Utah Valley. New Mexico State playing Seattle, which, to be honest, is a pretty long trip for New Mexico State. And then you go to Utah Valley at elevation. New Mexico State's a good team. They're probably the best team in this conference, but this is a really, really tough spot for them. If you take a team like New Mexico State and make them travel that far on Thursday night and then have to play Utah Valley the next game, this is a really, really tough spot. I'll be very curious to see what this line comes out at. Utah Valley might be favored here. I would hope if I was backing Utah Valley to get it at pick or -1, something like that. But it also depends on how this game goes here on Thursday night, New Mexico State and Seattle. I think that Seattle's a pretty good team. So, if New Mexico State would beat Seattle and put a big effort in here, I think that makes this spot look even better.
Yeah, and, it's tough because these teams, we really haven't had to worry about them until February in previous years, but now they're kind of part of the handicapping process. And as I'm looking at Utah Valley, one of the things I notice is that they do not run deep at all. They run about 7 guys deep overall. They've got, their top 2 starters play about 80% of the minutes. So this is a Utah Valley team that really does not have a whole lot of depth. So I think in back-to-back road situations for them, and of course they play Chicago State in the second game of a road trip, and Chicago State's probably the worst team in Division I. So maybe that's not a fade spot. But Utah Valley is a team with those back-to-back roadies. I'd be very worried about them in that second game. That's not the situation here. But again, you look for angles in these conferences where you're not betting into the market of thousands of people playing Duke and Virginia. You're betting into the market of a handful of sharps that feel like there's value in this conference.
Yeah, it's definitely different. I think in a spot like this, you have to either take Utah Valley or you have to pass as far as the side. I don't know why you would want to lay points or, whatever it is here. I don't really know what this line is going to be. Like I said, probably around pick'em. But New Mexico State's a good team. They've shown that they have flaws. Utah Valley, a team that's good on offense. Mark Pope's known as a really good offensive mastermind. Defensively, they're okay. I think that, in a spot like this, we're going to find out a lot about both of these teams. New Mexico State is a very deep team. They're going to play a ton of people from the bench. Like I said, Utah Valley, not a very deep team. But Utah Valley plays UT Rio Grande Valley on Thursday. They're one of the worst teams in this conference. So they're certainly in the better spot here. And I will say, just as a side note, I think it's hard when we get these conferences that have never been lined in the past because, as a handicapper, I didn't pay near as much attention to these conferences as what I need to now. But there can be some significant value here. And on Wednesday night, I played Liberty and Kennesaw State under. That ended up being my only play. That was a really good play. It won. I have to tell you, I got about the most feedback I've gotten all year from clients just saying, wow, Liberty and Kennesaw State under. That's pretty cool. I think that people can appreciate the fact that, when you're finding these ones that are way under the radar, it feels a little bit better. I mean, it's one of those where, nobody else is paying attention to that game. So if we're paying attention to it here on BangTheBook.com, it shows you what type of handicapping we think makes a lot of sense in the long run.
I mean, hey, I say this all the time. I mean, look, you want to watch Duke and Virginia? That's fine. I totally understand that. I mean, that's, that could end up being a Final Four matchup or something like that, depending on how the brackets shake out. I totally get it. But you know what? Winning money in that game means the exact same as winning money in a Big South game or a MEAC game or a WAC game here, as it were. It's all going to spend the same. It's all going to be in the bankroll counting for the same. So, you know what? I'd rather take the one where I feel like I can get a really defined edge instead of a Virginia versus Duke game and say, well, both of these teams are really, really good. Which one's going to be slightly better?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, watching a certain game versus watching another game, it makes sense if you want to watch Virginia and Duke. And some people just say, hey, I want to watch the game that I bet. And that's fine if you want to say that. And honestly, a lot of these games are on, ESPN Plus or ESPN3 or something. You can watch it on the computer. But, I don't think that watching the game while you're betting it should be your top priority if you really want to make money. So, you have to kind of decide, would you rather bet a game that you can watch or would you rather bet something that's more likely to make you win? And I think for most people listening to this show, I know what the answer would be.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you kind of think of it as, do I want to spend $10 on a movie ticket to watch this college basketball game? or do I want to spend $10 as an investment where I feel like I've got a pretty clear edge? So, again, it's all up to you, and there's nothing wrong with being in that first group. If you just want to bet on games that you want to watch and you're looking for us to give you some insight on those, that's absolutely fine. But keep in mind that it's a lot harder to beat a much more efficient market than it is to beat an inefficient market. So, it's all about what your priorities are with this hobby, supplement, industry, whatever it is to you. Keep it that way, or, make the concerted effort to do a little bit more, dig a little bit deeper, and find some plays where you probably have more of an edge. And, of course, as it were, we'll finish with a major conference game here, Oklahoma and Texas out in the Big 12. What's the story with this game in your mind, Kyle?
Well, I will say, first of all, it's not to say that you can't win in the big conference games. I don't think either one of us are trying to say that nobody can beat those conferences. I think it's certainly beatable. I just think it's easier to beat the lower conferences. There's less efficiency in the market there, so I think that's the point we're trying to make. Oklahoma and Texas, Shaka Smart's team has really turned into one of those teams that beats the big name teams, but they can't win consistently. I've been pretty disappointed with how Texas has done with Shaka Smart. I thought they would do better than they would. They really need a win here. I think if they lose this game, they're starting to look like a team that might end up in the NIT. And if you look at some of the games that they've won earlier this year, you'd think, really? But, you can't just win games in the non-conference and count on that if you fall apart in the conference late. The Big 12 is a good conference as far as depth, but Texas needs to win games like this. Oklahoma awful loss to Kansas State at home. I think that was Oklahoma's worst showing in the season, so you would expect something better from them here. How's this game going to shake out? Texas is going to be favored here, not by very much, maybe by 3 or 3.5 points. I don't know. I don't even know what to make of this game as far as the side. I would lean toward the under here, though. I think that both teams much better on defense than they are on offense. Both of these teams can go through some really long scoring droughts. Texas, while Shaka's teams are always thought of as really fast, and at ECU they usually did play very fast, they're using 20 seconds of the 30-second shot clock on average in the Big 12 play. That's very, very slow tempo. So make sure you understand that Texas is not one of those up and down teams. Even when they use the press, it's kind of to slow the game down instead of speeding it up.
Yeah, I just want to, before I add some thoughts on this game, I do want to echo what you said. We're not saying you can't win in power conferences. We're just saying that you got to keep in mind that you have a lower expectation of winning just because of the efficiency of the market. So I'm glad that you worded it a little bit better than I did there. But when it comes to this game, Oklahoma's great on defense, and Texas is pretty good on defense too. The question that I have is, at what point does Lon Kruger figure out what to do with this offense? They were so Trae Young heavy last year. You've got to think he's a smart enough coach and has good enough talent to figure out who his go-to guys really are and put them in a position to succeed. I have to think they hit that stride at some point. I don't know if it's on Saturday, but it's got to be coming, right?
Yeah, I would think so. I think Texas is one of the best defensive teams in this conference. They're 18th in defensive efficiency in the country. So, I wouldn't expect them to have a ton of success here. Oklahoma's 9th in defensive efficiency in the country. So you got some really good defense being played in this game. I think that Oklahoma is well coached, and I'm not saying that Shaka Smart's a bad coach. I think that he, has done well enough in the long term that we can't say that he's a bad coach. But Texas fans have been a little bit disappointed. I'll put it that way. You look at these two teams; neither of them foul very much. That's pretty important if you're looking for an under. Both teams pretty good at defensive rebounding. Neither team all that good at getting second chance. I think that if this total's in the mid-130s, if you could get a 135, 136, I would certainly lean to the under. And I also think that this is a game where we're going to learn a lot about both of these teams because Texas needs to win this game. They've lost 3 straight in the Big 12. Like I said, only 10-7 going into this game. Oklahoma in better shape than is Texas with some of their big wins so far this year. Florida was a good win for them. They've played a tough schedule. Even Wofford looks like a good non-conference win at this point. So I think that Oklahoma's in better shape than is Texas right now. So this game likely means more to Texas. But Oklahoma's coming off that loss as well.
Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper at huntersportspicks.com, and also doing his daily college basketball stuff for us at BangTheBook.com, and that situational article which we'll have another one either on Monday or Tuesday of next week. What's going on over at huntersportspicks.com right now, Kyle?
Yeah, check out the newsletter, Free Picks newsletter, if you haven't already. 12-2 in the last 14 free picks that have been sent out. I know quite a few people have signed up for that, have had some good feedback about people appreciating that newsletter. If you haven't already signed up, it's a free pick newsletter. I'll do some contests once in a while, cash prizes for those. I'll do like a bracket contest come March Madness, things like that you can sign up for only if you have the if you're signed up for the newsletter. So be sure to do that if you haven't already. And also definitely check out the daily article at BangTheBook.com and check out the videos on YouTube at Bang the Book.
Yep, and there should be another one here on Friday for our Friday listeners of this show. Kyle Hunter, huntersportspicks.com, regular contributor to BangTheBook.com, and at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me. Talk to you again on Monday.
All right, thanks. Take care.
A strong segment there, as always, with Kyle Hunter of huntersportspicks.com. And make sure you're checking out that daily piece over at BangTheBook.com with his college basketball picks. A lot of first-half derivative plays, a lot of totals that just barely missed the premium card. A lot of good stuff there from Kyle Hunter, and off to a fantastic start with those plays as well.